turn it too, okay?
Okay, so it's running. Yeah, it's running. Okay, let's go.
They work over there. Well, that road is down another side.
We'd like to welcome everyone this afternoon to the Scio Fall Festival Bicentennial Roundtable discussion. Earlier this spring we decided since we were going to celebrate our bicentennial, we should have a couple special events this year during the Scio Fall Festival, so we put together a little committee, and we had 2 meetings here in the Brock Room consisting of Arlene and Sarah and Paul Madsen, Linda Long, Gene Miser, I think that was most of the people that were here, Bob Hendricks, and come up with an idea to have a roundtable discussion on the history of Scio and on the history of the Buckeye State. So that's why we're here this afternoon. First off, we're going to have Doug Santini, the commander of the Scio American Legion, Post 482, lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. And after that, we're going to have him discuss the Scio Pottery Company. Now, I had all intentions of sitting down and getting a little history on each speaker, but that didn't happen. But I can tell you that Doug grew up in the Bowerston area, and I think he spent most of his career at the Scio Pottery Company. He's very active in community events, including the American Legion and the Civic Club and the Hike and Bike Trail. So,
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
now Doug's going to give us a little bit of a history on the Scio Pottery Company. This company put Scio on the map for many, many years.
I had to do what it was about 5 minutes, so. What I'm going to say today is the way I seen it, the Scio Pottery. It started back 1943, and I was a junior in high school. Scio was getting really rough sending boys to the service, and Lou started running out of employees, so he had to pick, well, he didn't get to pick of the litter, so he got us high school kids. We was allowed to leave school at 20 minutes after 2 to catch the pottery bus, and we was allowed to work till 10. That was pretty good, but the bus didn't leave back home till 12, so we had 2 hours to kill. And we had some young girls and stuff coming up from Denison, and they brought their roller skates. So they had a PA system that had a jukebox in, and they roller skated over in the warehouse. So one day I'm coming home on the car, coming to work on the bus. I seen a girl there, thought it was pretty nice to me. I told my mother I was going to marry her. Sure enough, I did. 5 years of it. Anyway, I started there in the pottery. I was a kid going out on the farm. You worked for 75, 50 cents a day was all you get. Started working pottery, man, it was 39 cents an hour. I was a rich guy. So before I ended up there going to the service, I was making 99, so you know I was a millionaire. Anyway, I didn't get to know too many people before the war. But who I did meet was real nice people. And then I had to graduate. Back in the 40s, everybody knew what graduation meant. It handed your diploma in the right hand and your greetings from the selective service in the other hand. So I was going for about 2 years back. Then I really got to start knowing the people of Scio through the pottery. And I liked what I saw. Especially Lou Reese. He treated me like a son. Anyway, me and my girlfriend, we started talking about getting married. Got to arguing on where we live. She wanted to live in Denison, I wanted to live in Bowerston. We finally came to the conclusion maybe Scio would be the best place. And I think it was the best thing we ever done in our life was living here in Scio.
How many worked at pottery?
What?
How many worked at pottery?
1,600 at the peak. Anyway, fire come along. That's when everybody got to know the people in Scio. I mean, everybody knows everybody. They treated you like a brother. Everybody was friendly. You never locked your doors at night. So we put the pottery together. That's when I made another good choice in my life. I took to the machine shop. There I met guys like Ray Wall, Wirt Baker, people like that. I got an education you couldn't get in 4 years in the Army off of those fellas. Anyway, Lou died. I was talking about Lou. He and him always fought and argued. I always told him that with his money and my looks, I could get any girl in Harrison County. So he nicknamed me ugly. He always called me ugly. Well, after he was gone, Scotty came along. Well, Scotty wasn't a man for the job. I have to admit that. He was scared. But he and him got along good. We worked together. He finally made me engineer with the party, so I can't say anything against him. He called me knucklehead. But whenever Scotty went away, why, Dick took over, and he treated me like a brother. And we got along real good to the end. So, come to the pottery, I'm glad that I worked there. I mean, we didn't make all that kind of money. A big pension, I think I made $65 a month of my pension after 49 years of it, but I'm satisfied and happy. But one thing about it, you hear everything about why the pottery closed. How many people want to know why I thought it closed? Well, we went to war, we beat the Japanese and the Germans. The Japanese had to have an industry or two or three to get their people back on board. They give the camera business, the pottery business, and some other business to the Japanese to get their homeland built back up again. Well, that didn't take a hold for a long time there. We got in towards the late 50s, early 60s. We started feeling the impact of it. But that, in my opinion, wasn't a real reason. As I say, this is my opinion. Whenever I first started there, people went to work, they knew more than foreman did. Foreman didn't have much to do because the people really enjoyed their work and they did what they had to do and didn't complain about it. When the 60s came along, something happened. Those good people started getting old. They started dying and retiring. And I don't like to say what kind of people we had to hire to replace them. And the foreman did not know what to do with them. I know I helped in a machine shop in Boston, and I shook my head at times at some of the things. And in my opinion, that's what brought the pottery down. Those people. If there's any question anybody wants to ask, I'll try to answer.
What year was the fire?
47.
So what year did you start working there?
43. Had 49 years there. I told
I
him.
quit.
I told Dick Reese when I shut the place down, I'd had 50 years in, you'd have to buy me a gold watch. Any other questions?
Remember when they used to take people to Pittsburgh to parties in Columbus?
Oh, yes.
Ride the train.
Never missed any of that.
Yeah, that was something.
That's what I said, it was a family over there. And you couldn't beat the people in town in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. I was out there, well, we had some bad apples, but what family don't fight? Yes, there were. And the people in town backed us over there 100%.
I know he came to the garage one day to get gas, and he said to me, now I want you to go down to my garden and get some vegetables. Tom says, you're not going down there and get any vegetables.
Did you go? Ella? Did you go anywhere?
No, ma'am.
Well, Doc, you said that the wages weren't too high, but Lou Reese was war bond chairman of Harrison County. And he insisted that his employees buy a bond every pay. And they would make lists, pages and pages of names, and bring them over to the bank, and we would type out the bonds. And you would be surprised then, 20, 30 years later, how much those bonds amounted to. So even though they didn't pay an hourly wage, the U.S. government bonds, the war effort, really amounted to something.
Back in '53, me and my wife decided we would build a house.
That's right.
So I went down to Jay Spiker, you know how hard it was to get money off of him. Well, he lent me the money, and well, might as well be in debt for the rest of my life. I got home, started building a house up on the hill. Here come the wife driving in a new Chevy. Man, oh man, well, he made such a good deal on the old one, I just couldn't turn him down. Well, another 10 years of my life. 2 days later, here come Bill Wagner and said, "Maybe you just bought a farm out in the hill on Christmas Street." I'm not sorry for any of them. But Chase Spiker always told me, "You want to lend money, lend it to the potter worker, he'll pay you back."
We sold furniture, and everyone had a nice home. And they really did. They had nice homes. They didn't make big money, but they had nice homes.
But it
And
was steady.
they furnished them on $10 a pay or $20 a month, and it was great. They
Good
were
steady
honest people.
employment, and they knew that paycheck was
Honest
gonna be there.
The bank would ever say what Jay Spiker said to me. He said, "Now, no man should be made to pay payments like that." He lent me the money, and he said, "Now, just how much you want to pay me back each month?" Try that today.
No.
Anything else?
I remember he used to stop to get gas and he'd come in to pay me. Now you keep the change. He'd do that every time.
Well, before I close, would you mind standing one more time? Kind of brush, everybody brush their hands. Now, if they have to go to the beach in the hall, on my speech for it, I can say I got a standing ovation. Leave it to Doc.
Next, we're gonna have Sarah Cheatham come up. Now, this lady keeps me in line. She always wants to know what's going on with the fair and with the fire department and various things in town. I got to talk to Sheila to find out that they moved to Scio in around 1960, her and her husband, Talmadge, and she's very active in the community, the civic club. I think one of her biggest interests is the Friends of the Scio Library and also the Scio Food Cupboard. So we'd like to have Sarah come up. She's got some real interesting facts and figures on the Buckeye State, on the state of Ohio. So Sarah?
That was really sneaky. I found this a while back, and I couldn't resist buying it. I thought it was so close. Now, I suppose we all know that Ohio joined the Union in March 1st, 1803, with Chillicothe, the first capital. Now, let's jump back in time from there until September the 2nd, 1788, in the little settlement of Marietta, where the opening of the first session of court in the Northeast Territory was about to take place. A procession of the settlers was formed and marched to Campus Martins, which was to be the seat of the government. The minister asked for a blessing, and then Colonel Sprout, in a deep and strong voice, declared the court open. Several interested Indians were present. Now, the Indians loved ceremonies. it was just something extra to them. And when they saw Colonel Sprout with his uniform and sword, and he was over 6 foot tall, they were very impressed. And they called him Heatok, which in the Indian term means big buckeye. Of course you know that at that time we had numerous buckeye trees all over the state, and they were beautiful. Where I grew up at Flushing, across the road, they had a whole line of buckeye trees. I don't know whether they're still there or not, but we enjoyed them so much, and they were beautiful. The Indian name for the tree refers to the appearance of the ripened buckeye. And after you took it out of the shell, you see a brown with a light spot on it. And to the Indians, that made them think, made them think of the buck deer's eyes. That's where it came from, really. This story explains the origin of the name of the buckeye trees and its first application to Ohio, but it was another 50 years before we find the reason for the wider application of the tree's name to the people of Ohio. It was in 1840 that a presidential campaign was on, and such campaigns were as tense then as they are now. And General William Henry Harrison was running for president, and his opponents got up the idea, and they had a picture of him sitting in a log cabin, or said that he wasn't fit to be president of the United States. He was better off in a cabin drinking hard cider. So his sponsors took that up. And they, at that time, of course, there weren't many railroads, so they built log cabins out of buckeye trees and had him sitting there with the buckeyes hanging down on the walls and a coonskin cap, of course. And this appealed to the people so much that they elected him president. The people even run around with the wagons. His supporters even went around with the wagons. But in Harrison State, Ohio, the use of this went much farther. And of course they would go with the wagons with the log cabins on them, and they were very enthusiastic. And he came to be called the log cabin candidate. And one of the songs they sang then was, "Oh, tell me what is to be your cabin's fate? We'll wheel it to the Capitol and place it there on this date, for a token and a sign of the bonny Buckeye State." So in the midst of all this excitement, people from Ohio came to be called the Buckeyes. In November the 1840, General Harrison was elected president, and the popular name for Ohio was now firmly fixed as the Buckeye State. I thought that was so interesting about the deer. If you want to pass that around or anything, just don't lose it.
Up next, we're going to have Arlene Neesmith. Now, Arlene grew up here in Scio and spent most of her, I guess, adult life in Florida, and she moved back here a few years back. I've got to know her real well in the last 6 months. She's another one that keeps me in line here, keeps me going. So And if everybody don't know, she's now our correspondent for the Harrison News Herald. So if you have any news tidbits, Wednesday at noon is the deadline, right?
Right, I
You
have
get
to
them
have it
included for
sent
the
in
following
by
week. So
Wednesday.
she's going to speak on some of Scio's, the Scio area early settlers. She's done a lot of research up in the library on some of the early settlers. So she's going to give a little talk on that subject for you.
Thank you. Back in 1814, Joseph Harrison came to Ohio with his father. They came from England, but 2 years earlier, he came in 1816. His father came over in 1814 because he had some letters from relatives that came over here. So he went back home and he told his family, we're going to move to that new world. I think there's opportunity there. So they all brought his family. And along at the same time that the John Harrison family came, from England was the Hartley, McClansboro, Waddington, Craven, Bale, Calcott, and Fox. I know you know some of those names. They sound familiar to a lot of us. From Scotland came Patterson and Macmillan, along with earlier settlers from Pennsylvania, the Hendricks, Gutschall, and Shambaugh. The Creel and Amos families came in from Maryland. The Markley, Bruton, and Allen families, whose ancestors had been native to America from its earliest history, also came. All of these folks came to make a diversified community, to live together in a united effort to conquer the native forest and to develop the country which came to be known as Dining Fork. Dining Fork takes its name from two main branches of the upper valley of that name, which bears a resemblance to a two-tined fork. From New Rumley, which set up on a hill, the road winded westwardly down across one of those branches of water, which finger-like range westwardly and takes their course to join the Tuscarawas River. And then rising to another ridge and keeping its way thereon through a forest of large white oaks, chestnut oaks too, for about 2 miles. And this brought the father and son, our Harrisons, to a gigantic chestnut tree standing in a triangular space where 3 roads came together. It stood there like a huge sentinel, as if to mark the end of their long journey. We can fancy that they looked upon the scene before them, to the south, to the north, and then to the west, and there beheld for the first time the valley of the Dining Fork. They took the road, which turned at an acute angle to the right, and walked slowly down the hill into the valley to the spot which was the future home of the Harrison homestead. And I think most of you know where that's at, where Charles Harrison had lived. Now, if you could create a picture in your mind, the appearance of the valley that spring season that the Harrisons first saw it, we would have before us a wooded landscape covered with the gigantic oaks, poplar, and cherry trees upon the sides and the tops of the hills. In the valley were large maple, shell-barked hickory, and the spreading elm. The forest held aloft the flowering dogwood, and the wild grape entwined itself where it could secure a hold. And in the deep glen there was to be heard the gurgling stream running below the moss-covered rocks and fallen trees, and springing up among them were the large ferns and the sweet cisley. On the hilltops there was the wintergreen, pleasant to the taste, and the boys soon named it Mountain Tea. Along their sides were those delightful hardlingers of spring, the wild phlox, or sweet william, the wild geranium, or cranesbill, mayapple, Dutchman breeches, and bloodroot. The serviceberry, or shadboosh, and the mulberry gave promise of fruit which would soon tickle the palate of the woodsman. Down in the valley were violets, buttercups, and later the tiger lily. And on the brushy banks near the stream were the early promise of wild strawberries. There too was animated life. The gray squirrel leaping from branch to branch among the trees. The fox, the raccoon, the woodchuck, or American marmot, the inquisitive skunk, and the grinning face of the possum may be seen at intervals. The bear had gone, but tradition has it that occasionally a wolf was seen, and he was still a challenge to the hunter when he was caught in a trap. The wily weasel and the mink stole quickly and furtively along the smaller streams, and the muskrat dived when danger threatened and knew just where to raise up from the water and hide himself in the bank. As to bird life, the hoot-hoot of the great horned owl might be heard in the twilight as he sat high upon a tree and was silhouetted against the sky. The buzzard soared with ease overhead. The rap-rap of the woodpecker echoed through the trees, and the drumming of the male grouse or pheasant might be heard in the deep woods, and the wild duck might be seen swimming in the open stretches of the creek. There were also the sweet notes of the bluebird, thrush, and song sparrow, as well as that of the robin, the raucous cry of the blue jay, the scolding note of the catbird, and the plaintive note of the whippoorwill. Then in the low, mushy places, the turtle could be seen slipping lazily off a half-submerged log, and the frogs kept up a loud revelry with their high notes and their low notes. Later in the summer was to be seen the red bells of the trumpet vine, the iron and the milkweed, and that plumed night of the forest, the cohosh, the dewberry and the blackberry ripen. Whoever has eaten them fresh off the vine ripe, I don't think you want to eat them any other way, unless it's out of dire necessity. And the pioneer, skilled in the art, might watch the industrious bee until it staggered under its toll, then rise and after a brief survey of its surroundings, go straight to the storehouse of honey in some hollow tree in the woods. Hazelnuts were plentiful, and with the first frost was the ripening of the wild grape and the showering of the chestnuts and hickory nuts upon the ground. It was not man alone that enjoyed this great feast in the woods, for among the leaves were to be found great quantities of acorns, upon which the hogs fattened without the aid of other food. In the late autumn, the great forest changed her dress from the restful green to the yellow that might be seen in the leaves of maple, ash, and sassafras, the deep red of the sumac and the gum, and the bronze, purple, and orange of the oak. This was the picture of our land before the Civil War, and why we say beautiful Ohio. You will be hearing the history of Scio businesses, but on this Harrison homestead was erected one of the earliest sawmills. How many men of the present day remember the old sawmills? I think they're about gone. In pioneer days, they were found on every stream having enough water to run them. They sawed all the lumber used in the first buildings erected by the pioneers, and the old Harrison mill had a life of more than half a century. It sawed all the timber in the neighborhood, including most of the oak lumber used in the construction of the Scio College building, which was built in 1867 and 68. There were days during the Civil War when soldiers, home on furlough, used to call out at the old mill, wearing the long blue coats with the caps attached over the shoulder. And it was in that old mill that some of the locals first heard of the assassination of Abraham Lincoln.
Okay, next we're going to have Abby Amos up here. Abby is a life resident of Scio and has spent her entire career educating our children.
That's right. Still going.
She taught in our school system for, I guess she's still teaching part-time and tutoring, and she's going to talk about some of our not-so-famous citizens. I went down and asked Abby to speak, and her first question was, what am I going to speak about? I said, I'm not here to ask you what you're going to speak about, I should ask you to speak. So,
That's right, that's what we said. Oh, I'm ready.
because Sarah insisted that we had to have Abby. That was number one on the list.
Well, I'm ready.
So we're glad to have you, and the floor is yours.
I'm glad to be here. I really am. I'll get Sarah later.
Not if I can run faster than you.
Well, I'm going to tell you about a man who made torpedoes for 60 years in Scio. And when I was small, he lived right just about in this area. There's a yellow house where Mac McGinnis lived on the corner, and there was a brick house here, and he lived here. Later on, moved up to Main Street. I'm going to take you back right now to the great oil boom in Scio. It lasted a little more than a year, but it was long enough to start this kid of 15 in a business that he was going to be in for 60 years until he died. Anybody know who it is? You do, be quiet. He was a torpedo maker, and he was just 15 when his family moved from Monroe County to Scio in Harrison County. The year I told you was 1899, and it was a frenzied time in Scio. It says, oil had, this was a Cleveland Plainfield reporter, and he said oil had been discovered in Scio just a few months earlier. In the quiet college town of a few hundred, he says, sober citizens. I can't imagine it, we're all sober. And students, when this town was overnight turned into a roaring, wide-open hellhole of 5,000 oil-mad men. He never, he added, have so many derricks been planted in so small a space of ground in Ohio's history. At night, Scio is the best place in Ohio to stay away from. Folks who go about are likely to be found in the morning with their pockets inside out and their heads in much the same condition. And a Pittsburgh Dispatch reporter said sudden wealth has burdened Scio with all the vices of a frontier town. And he says that the oil camp followers erected their flimsy paradise along a smooth, glistening track of slime, 2 feet deep, 3 squares long, and they called it Main Street. And on one side was the boulevard of the place, a boardwalk, I didn't know this, elevated on stilts. And while these wild, oil-rich, oil men, clattered along the boardwalk, teams of 6 to 30 horses and mules struggled to haul pipe, timbers, and machinery through the mud of Main Street that came up to the wagon beds. Now this was a strange and exciting scene for a 15-year-old kid who hadn't been any farther than Woodsville, Ohio in his life. But he didn't have time to walk around to find out what was going on with all those card games that ran all night for 24 hours and all the other things, because his father opened a sheet metal shop and the boy did the work of a man to keep up with the demand for metal roofs, gutters, and flashing. And then his dad decided to expand the business, and he opened a shop next door, and this was used to include the making of torpedoes. And these were shells filled with nitroglycerin, and they were used to shoot the wells, right? An expert torpedo maker was imported, and young Elmer became the helper. So that's how young Elmer got started. And now by the time he got his start in business,
these hazards to nitroglycerin were truly appreciated and guarded against, and it took a lot of lives. In fact, Elmer said that he helped make nitroglycerin in a factory near Scio. And he said 2 of them worked in this little hillside plant. And he goes on to describe how they made it, and then they finished, and from the back, 8 or 10 quart cans were filled and stored in a magazine until they needed a shot. Well, the reward for this, working with this, was a serious, bad headache. And anyone who worked with the stuff and inhaled its fumes was subject to what they called the shooter's headache, which Elmer had a shooter's headache. And then later he often contracted to transport loads of nitro from the magazine to the scene of the shot. And this used a Model T Ford truck, and he took over these unpaid roads, and he was flirting with liquid death every time he left. And for this, the pay was $10 a day, usually, not always that much. But he made it, didn't get blown up, and he really felt very good when he says he made his trips with his truck around these bumpy roads, was when he was the one who had made the cans and sealed them, because he was very meticulous and care, and he knew his life depended on it. And then he told an interesting thing. Jim Kane. Tell him what happened. You know?
Yes, it was my father's father made nitroglycerin, and he was killed delivering nitroglycerin.
Good enough. And as I understand it, he was very careful with just happened.
And there's a story that he told his wife it was his last trip. That was in the family. I don't know.
Doesn't that make the neck wrinkle?
And my dad, Tom Kane, was 13 at the time.
Just a young boy. Isn't that something? How about that? You didn't know.
I guess there's other skeletons out there. I don't know.
But poor Jim got it. And then it tells a story about Harry Furman. Now, did you ever hear of Harry Furman?
Oh, yes.
Okay, tell me if this is true. It said Harry died quietly in bed after a lifetime of making nitro in his factory and shooting wells. But he had some mighty close calls, and one of them was Harry's wagon was loaded with Elmer's shells and 100 or so quarts of nitroglycerin in Elmer's sturdy cans. He was on his way to shoot a well some miles west of Scio. It was cold, and it was a blustery day, so that Harry drove along with his car, turned high because it was cold, and he approached a crossing of the Pennsylvania Railroad on the little used road, and he couldn't remember whether he looked carefully or not. So, in any case, he heard nothing but the howling wind as his team stepped onto the tracks. The westbound train struck, killed the horses, shattered the front end of the wagon, tossed Harry and his cans of nitro gently over the landscape. As evidence of its unpredictable nature, the nitro might have been so many cans of maple syrup lying on the cold hillside. The train stopped, and the indignant crew hustled back to the scene just as Harry came limping up. "You idiot!" shouted the irate engineer. "It's a miracle you weren't killed." Harry looked slowly about the wreckage and back to the engineer. "It's a wonder we weren't all killed," he said mildly. "Them cans there are all plumb full of nitroglycerin." And the engineer's knees sunk to the ground as he gazed at the cans, and he was just weak, and he was absolutely incapable, they say, of proceeding with his run. So they got a substitute engineer, and he had to be sent from Denison to bring the train in. All right, is that true?
That's true.
Pretty good
Amen.
story. So Scio boomed as 1,000 wells were sunk in around the town. 250 were drilled inside the village, including the school ground, the college campus, the churchyard, and then as a new century came in, first flush paving. Drilling continued up and down the valleys and ridges in all directions, but at a slower pace. Elmer continued dependable torpedoes. He sent them all over the state of Ohio. He even sent them as far as Montana. And he himself made many, many deliveries. And he worked at this 60 years. And it's Elmer Mankin up on Main Street. His house is right beside the museum. And he did this, did a good job with it. And I remember him. How many remember Elmer? Well, that's good. Yeah, I liked Elmer. Elmer was a man of few words, though. Shouldn't say too much. Keep what he's doing. Anyway, he made the shells until just before he died in 1964 at the age of 78. And isn't that an interesting story? What year did he die?
Hey, Abby,
Hey,
may I add something to your speech?
sure, go right
On
ahead.
Elmer Minkle, we had our fire in
You're 47.
We had to put all new ductwork in the water.
Yeah, and did he do it?
He did not.
He
He
did
sent
not?
Clint McLaughlin over, and within a matter of a short time, he taught Clint how to do it. And we never needed a man to do it after that.
Because Elmer
Taught
did
him.
everything right and taught Clint.
Yes, he did.
And Clint did that.
Clint never forgot it, and neither did the pottery.
Well, that's good. I'm glad you added that. That's a footnote.
Yeah.
That was a good one. See, I like to speak about that.
Thanks very much. Okay, at this time, we're going to have Nancy Provide speak on the history of Scio businesses. I have a feeling she's going to kind of start where Abby ended and bring us up through the last century. Nancy and her husband operated two businesses in Scio for over 50 years that provides funeral home and a furniture store. And Nancy has been involved in several organizations throughout the years, well, every organization in town. Served as president for the Civic Club in different towns and headed the 4th of July celebration and all the ladies' organizations, which I don't know nothing about. So at this time, we'll have Nancy come up and speak on the history of Scio business.
Well, thank you, JT, but I didn't want to talk on the businesses.
Talk on whatever you want to talk about.
I wanted to talk on the oil boom. Did you know that Scio had 3 banks during the oil boom?
You told me.
Did you know that they had a company store that did $25,000 worth of business each day? Did you know we had 7 hotels? And I don't know how many saloons. And did you know that we had Wheeling, Lake Erie, and Pennsylvania Railroad? And do you know they brought the showgirls out from Pittsburgh and they paraded them up and down through the mucky mire mud streets and showed them off and then took them into the saloons that night and had them dance and do whatever they did. And did you know that? And then they went back to Pittsburgh. Oh, it was a wild and woolly place. Wicked. I remember, how many of you saw Boomtown with Clark Gable and Spencer Tracy? Well, you know, when I was a kid, Guy Cale was quite an authority and George Stevenson on this subject. And so we went up to the water office one evening and Boomtown was showing at the Hippodrome uptown, and we said, we'd like for you to go to see Boomtown. Oh, they said, we don't go to the movies. And I said, oh, Mr. Cale, you've got to go to this movie. Well, we talked them into it, and they walked up, I can see them now, going up the hill to the picture show. And they went up the hill to the picture show, and they saw Boomtown, and we waited on them. And they come back down the hill, and they said it wouldn't hold a candle to Scio. And you know Clark Gable, his dad worked in the oil fields for my granddad. And so we have quite a hinge here. Now that's what I wanted to tell you. I wanted to tell you that whole story, and and someday if you have time and I have time, we'll get together and I'll tell you that story. But I have a friend who's kind of worked on me to tell another story. A story that I have told once, or twice, or 3 times. And so I'd like to talk to you a little bit about Scio after the oil boom, after the Cronin pottery was here and had gone, before the Scio pottery, in the 1920s. Now if you have a real good imagination, imagine me, 5, 6, or 7. And let's go down to the Pennsylvania Railroad. Be my friend. Take my hand. Let's go for a walk. Let's come up the hill. And we're going to start out at the Pennsylvania Railroad. And then we're going to walk over to the Wheeling and Lake Erie. And then we'll come up to the bridge that covered the Canadian Bridge. And at the end of the bridge that went straight uptown, there was a road. And it just shot right straight up. Oh, it was a terrible hill. Not very long, but straight up. And in front of that hill was a house. And it sat on a triangle. Now, I don't know how many of you remember that house that sat on that triangle. But wasn't that a funny thing? It's a good thing it wasn't here now, because someone would have hit that house and just knocked it right over to College Street, and we'd have had an awful time. But I want to take this walk with you. And so there's houses up along the street there, and we're coming up along the street there, and the first business that I think is along there is a pool room. A pretty decent sort of a pool room. And the next business was a little ladies' shop. Now, I used to remember who owned that ladies' shop, but by golly, I don't know who owned that. Pauline, do you know? Well, she doesn't remember either.
Wasn't it a good bread?
Anyway, what they sold was hats and scarves and gloves, which were very important of the day. But then you come to that little shop, and we're going to pass Coy Woods' barber shop. And then you cross the alley, and by George, there's Mr. Cunningham's grocery. Oh, it was a nice little grocery. And across from Mr. Cunningham's grocery was the I believe, Webster, M.M. Webster, that's what it was. M.M. Webster Hardware. Oh, it was a fine store. And Mr. Webster was a fine man. But come back across the street with me, because we're going to go along that street on this walk. And the next was a house from Mr. Cunningham's. And the people who resided there were the Bowers. And then we have the Bowers store. Now, it was a grocery store and a dry goods store, and they sold shoes and boots for the entire family. And over onto the west side, there was a little room that housed a meat market. Now, if you went across the alley there, while you come to the Scio Bank, and Mr. Cale and Mary Jones, and there was quite a little crew in there. And then you come to Adrian Carpenter's barber shop. Now, it was a pretty good-sized barber shop. as I walked along, I looked in there because it was pretty big shop and lots of people loafed in there. There was much wisdom. You got a lot of wisdom in that shop. Now then, as you come along then, Mr. Slonicker's jewelry store.
Earl Cole.
Who said?
Earl Cole.
Not Mr. Cole. Then, this was Mr. Sloniker in 1920s.
Don't you remember he's still up on the building, isn't he?
Yes, the Sloniker building.
Earl Cole afterwards?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
And I hate to, but anyway, Mr. Sloniker was a nice man, and he lived over before the Minkles moved up there. He lived over in one of those nice brick houses. And Mrs. Sloniker was nice too. I knew all these people. I must have been the village idiot. Anyway, you're walking along the street with me, and we've just passed Adrian's barber shop, and across the street was the tin shop, and then you come along and we had I'm not sure what was in there. There was the post office, but there was something else in there. Well, no, Mr. Sloniker, and then the post office, and then we had the Ray McClansborough hardware store, and it was a little small store, and then on the corner we had the Scio clothing. And the Scio clothing was run by Chauncey Mockerman, and a man could get a tailor-made suit there, or all of his needs. And then you could get shoes and boots and for the whole family. Now, if you look down in back of those stores, you would see a blacksmith shop. Jim Ewing ran that blacksmith shop. And then if you looked up the hill, you would see the Scio Theater. George Deswald owned that theater. And across the street from that, you've been talking about that bakery. Well, across the street from that was the first bakery that I remember. Quite a big building. And then you come back down to the other corner, and the wonderful Silas Carnegie, pictures here, Silas Carnegie building, which was the Carnegie Scott store. It was my playhouse. I thought it was the most wonderful place I ever saw in my life. Nora Conaway Jamison was one of the clerks. Mr. Lukens, Nellie Lukens' father was one of the clerks. And the other one was Mr. Mackle. I would go in there, and I don't know, I practically lived there, because it was my playhouse. And they were wonderful people to put up with me. Now, I was kind of a gopher, but then, on the other hand, I must have been a terrible person. But then as you go along the street there, you come to the water office. And then Mrs. Minkle's millinery. That was on there, that side of the street. And then Aunt Nervy Stevenson's house and Judge Carnegie's house was in there. And down in back of that was a beautiful rose garden. And they kept it just manicured. And if I acted decent, I could get in that place once in a while. But if I was misbehaving, I was not invited. But anyway, you cross the little alleyway there, and you come to the Scio Opera House. What a wonderful building that was. Big, wide stairway that took you up when you had your tickets, and the stage was wonderful, and they had all those seats that were numbered, and the front end of it, you could open the doors and go out on that roof business, and then you could see they had those fire escapes on each side. But all the talent in town was shown off up there. And the school did their plays there. And once in a while, they took the seats up and had a good dance. So it was a wonderful place. And then you came to Miss Dux Coleman's house, the home furnishings for ladies. What a wonderful store it was. What a wonderful lady she was. And if you miss Dux Coleman, you miss Scio, because she was a marvelous, marvelous businesswoman, a marvelous person, and really, she just was part of Scio. And you just have to have a little history of Miss Dux. And then there was a little store there owned by Joe Mason, a little store there that was a grocery store. And then we come to the Snyders, and Bill Snyder and Minnie lived there, and Frank and Lena, and they had their barber shop there in the front of the house. And then next was the D.N. Bauer Grocery. And if you would look up the street, you'd see the Presbyterian Church. And if you'd look down the street, you'd see the Methodist Church. And if you'd look across the street, now if you're walking with me, I want you to see these things. And so then you walk over and you see the Standard Garage, a brick edifice that was just quite nice for Scio, owned by George Deswalt. And to the west of that, there was a small room. Frank Ritchie had a meat shop there. And you come across the street, and there was Starkey's drugstore, and the Cairns furniture store. And then if you would look up that alleyway across the street, by George, there was another blacksmith shop there. Old Bill Kreitz had one. And you see, we had a lot of horses. We had a lot of horses there. Now then, when you come to Cairns's, you crossed over there, and there were funny buildings along there. They were old, black, dark, funny buildings. I'm not sure of what was ever in there, but I think maybe there was a tailor shop one time when I was a kid. And then we come on down, and there was nice houses, nice people. We kept coming along, and Mr. Cairns built a house, and then across the street from him was Mr. Webster's house. Then there was the Lewises lived there, and the Barneses had a nice home there, and then the Bairds had a house right next to the school. And then next to Mr. Cairns's house was that little house, and it was one of the Barnes boy lived there and raised his family. And you know, next to that was the Presbyterian manse, and the next to that was the Methodist manse. And they got along real good. And so if you go down the street now a little ways with me, you'll see the school. It was built in 1914. Oh my, but we were proud of our school. And we had a nice, big, flagpole out in front, and a cannon that they brought from World War I. And you know, I'd just like awfully well to tell you about all those people that lived in those houses. And I'd like to tell you about the characters who run the businesses. I really would. But it's almost time for me to go to school. And I've enjoyed this walk so much. I hope you have. I hope you've enjoyed this walk, and that you found out something about Scio that you didn't know. But if you're back in town, I'll take the walk with you again, and I'll tell you all about the people too, because it's the people that makes things go. So, thank you. I'm going to go to school now.
Now, where did the street go to? I don't know anything about it. Where did you start?
I started at the Pennsylvania station and went to the schoolhouse.
Down the railroad station.
That's far end of town.
Then she come up
That's
both sides
all the way
of
up
the
to
street.
town.
And this one took Main Street. I could take you up all the alleys if you'd like to go.
Nancy, remember you used to have man watching the railroad crossing instead of gates? Remember that?
Nancy,
there was no sidewalks or anything.
Nancy, has the school always been where it is now?
The school was there and the old school was up in back of where our school is now. Up in back of where our school is
Where
located
the,
now. And then
gymnasium
this
is now.
school that we had was built in that I mentioned was built in 1914. And then we had an addition onto that was exactly like it, and it was built in 1937.
Yeah.
And when we're talking about that was, the school was up in back of there, and that's where the first oil well was too.
Hey, I think we ought to have a big hand for all of our guest speakers. It's not a great effort to put on a program for us today. Also, we'd like to thank the Scio Branch Library for letting us use the Brock Meeting Room to hold this in air-conditioned comfort. And we'd like to thank Arlene Easlick and Linda Long for providing our refreshments. And E.D. Shoemaker for pictures. And for everybody for coming. And also tomorrow afternoon at 4 o'clock on the festival stage, we're going to have a bicentennial birthday party. The Cub Scout troop is going to be there to lead us in the pledge. Roger Logston from Drew Remley is going to sing Beautiful Ohio, which is a beautiful waltz. I guess he does a real good job. And we're going to let all the
That
kids...
was written by Mrs. Thompson, up from Jewett.
And
Yeah.
we're going to ask all the community kids to come up on stage and sing
They
happy
don't know these
birthday.
things.
No, we're too young. So. And we're going to have bicentennial birthday cake. Baker's providing the cake. And anybody that wants to will have a chance to ring the bicentennial bell. It's here for the festival. And then we'll be leading tonight's parade. Sheriff Miller's going to pull the bell for the parade. So, and also one more, if anybody knows the new American flags up through the main part of town, they were donated by Mrs. Marcia Scott and Andrew Scott and Jimmy. Anybody else have any